Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to this inaugural Truth Tellers Festival. We're making history here together. I'm Jenny Kleeman. I'm a journalist, broadcaster, and author. And with me is Ruhi Hamid, who is the director of this extraordinary film that we've seen, Shadows in Sunlight, and Marta from Grain Media, which produced the short. Shadows in Sunlight is one of 3 films made in collaboration with Nobel Prize Outreach and Grain Media, exploring how healthcare professionals are working to eradicate diseases. And clearly, there are many different ways that you can make a film about eradicating diseases, but you have chosen to make a really beautiful looking film. It's atmospheric, cinematic. It sounds so beautiful as well. The music is beautiful. There's no voiceover. And it's very much character-led. Why did you choose to approach this topic in that way?
Thank you. There's been lots of films made about polio eradication in Pakistan, but they've all been current affairs films. And I think I wanted to tell the story differently because for me, this film wasn't really about polio eradication as such. And that was the beauty of it, that Grain Media gave me such a blank canvas to work with, as did the Nobel Foundation. All they said to me was make it cinematic and make it feel important. It doesn't have to be any science in there. And so I thought I wanted to tell the story of a bit kind of like a Avenger story, you know, these sort of women with cloaks going out there to save the world. So I wrote it like a kind of a drama script. I decided that I wasn't going to do it in a normal kind of current affairs way, because I think most people just turn off when it's a current affairs film. They're not interested in it. They think, oh, this is going to be about science. It's going to be about something very dark. And so I wanted it to be a bit more compelling, that drew the audience in from the first frame. And I wanted it to be character-led. And, you know, so I wanted to find a really good character who could carry that story. And yes, and in a way, you know, Pakistan is a country that I find fascinating. I've made lots of documentaries there, and it just intrigues me all the time. And every time I go there, I learn something new.
I wanted to ask you about the access you got. First of all, how you found your main character, but also how you got the access to these incredibly intimate settings, people's homes, and people who very much didn't want Ishrat to be there, let alone Ishrat with you and a camera. How did you make that happen?
So obviously we got a lot of support from the polio campaign in Pakistan, the WHO, UNICEF, all these incredible organizations that are working with the Pakistan government to eradicate polio, because I don't know if people know, but Pakistan and Afghanistan are the last 2 countries where polio has not been eradicated. And as long as it exists there, we're all at risk, basically. All it is a flight away from from our children, basically. So we got a lot of support from that office. But actually, in the end, finding the character was what we do as documentary makers. We just keep talking, pick up the phone. I rang lots and lots of different women who are involved in this campaign until I found the right person. And the moment I spoke to Ishrat, she was literally walking home. She told me she was walking through a cemetery at the time, rushing home to get to better Wi-Fi. Mm-hmm. And she just sounded really feisty to me. So before we'd even spoken about polio or anything and what her work is, I just thought, oh, I like her. She's got a bit of a kind of a pizzazz to her. And that's exactly what I wanted to portray. I didn't want these women to be seen as victims, because that's how they've been portrayed in all the other documentaries. Yes. And I wanted to show that these are feisty women who are out there pushing boundaries. And so I just fell in love with her from her voice and the things she said to me. So I didn't do a recce. We didn't have the budget to do a recce. I didn't meet her before. It was all done by telephone and a very grainy kind of call on the phone, you know. But I just had my faith in her. And in terms of, getting the sort of access, I have a brilliant producer in Pakistan. And I can't reiterate enough how important it is to work with local people on the ground. I know Pakistan well. I filmed there a lot, so I understand the culture. I speak Urdu, so that helps. So I knew what I was getting into, which was actually a very challenging situation in a city like Peshawar, which is deeply conservative. And as you know from the film, there's a lot of suspicion on the vaccine vaccination program.
Yes. And you had to make that point, didn't you? And yet you didn't want it to feel like a current affairs program. So you very elegantly managed to weave in some archive. I mean, for me, what's so interesting about this is in one respect quite a local story, because as you say, it's in Pakistan and Afghanistan, only countries where polio hasn't been eradicated. But in another respect, it's completely global because it's about fake news and vaccine skepticism. So, I mean, it's a challenge, isn't it, to make something that feels cinematic and character-led, but also include those important editorial points that your audience needs to know about.
Yeah, I really wanted to make it feel universal because, you know, having been through COVID, we had our vax deniers, you know, there's conspiracy theories, there's fake news. So I wanted to make it feel universal, that it wasn't just these weird, odd people in a developing world country that are a bit, you know, skeptical or backward or anything. I just didn't want that to come across. I wanted it to be a universal story that we all relate to, because otherwise, you know, how do we connect to people in other parts of the world and not see them as the other?
Yes.
That was really important for me, to make them feel just like us, which is exactly what they are. That was.
Marta, I want to ask you about the kinds of stories that Grain is drawn to. Is there a particular thing that is Grain's bag?
Well, I think this is a perfect example of a Grain film and what we aim to make at Grain. And Ruhi, you just put it perfectly, of sort of, it's about a small story, but telling a much bigger picture. I think the first thing that we look for is purpose. What is the meaning in this story? But we can't lead with that. As you were just saying, it has to be a compelling story. And I think that is what makes this so brilliant. What you were just saying is that the universality of it and the relatability of this story. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for stories that are really compelling and great characters. So that could be, you know, a great story, but also it could be something that's sort of shows the best of humanity, which feels important at the moment. And then it's about wrapping it up as, and it was interesting that you just sort of made that reference of the Avengers, but it's wrapping it up as a love story or a thriller or an action movie. You know, I think thinking in those terms is quite helpful because, you have to lead with the story rather than the issue.
So is it a question of having films with a purpose by stealth? The purpose is smuggled in along with what is a fantastic watch?
There is definitely some of that. Sweeten the pill.
Yes.
Yes, I think, you know, at the heart of it, all our films have to have purpose. Otherwise, we're like, what's the point in them? And Grain often run impact campaigns alongside their films to bring about real, tangible change and to harness the power of that film. But if you lead with the issue, you know, I think our aim is to sort of reach as wide an audience as possible. And there's no point preaching to the converted.
Yes.
You know, it's great to make a sort of issue-led film that people who are interested in polio or vaccination might watch. But our ambition, obviously, is to reach as big an audience as possible.
I want to ask you both about how much the commissioning landscape has changed over the past 10 or 15 years. That it used to be that these kinds of documentaries, there was a lot of public service remit behind the commissioning. And nowadays, with the streamers, there aren't the same motivations behind what makes something look good on paper and something that people want to commission. Do you think that viewers have a less varied diet, are offered a narrower variety of things nowadays, now that so many people, I mean, there is a kind of boom in documentaries, but it's a particular kind of documentary, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, as a director, I've definitely noticed that there's less of an appetite for the type of films I make, which are these sort of very obstock, character-led type films. You know, the obsession is, as we all know, for true crime, celebrity-driven. And I think it's a real shame because I think there is a huge appetite for these kind of films. I screened this film 2 weeks ago on a private screening, and people came out saying that they felt inspired once again to watch documentaries because there were 3 documentaries and they were all character-led about small places but big kind of impact. And so I think the commissioners are missing a trick by staying on a certain track, because television has become really boring as a consequence. And I think there is definitely a need for these kind of films. And I think Grain Media do a good job. And there's a few other production companies, Tiger Lily Films, always go for, you know, quite interesting subjects. So I think there are some that do that, but there's not enough of it. And I think there is an appetite for it.
Marta, do you think people need to be reminded that films like this exist?
Absolutely. And, I think public broadcasting now is more vital than ever to have that array of stories. There is obviously a narrowing of what network streamers want. Having said that, those are the confines in which we work in, and the challenge is to still make the films we want to make within those confines. And sort of harping on again about what I was saying earlier, I think it is about story and, finding a compelling, engaging story, which will always engage an audience. And sort of interestingly, not the last two, but some of the last two films that Grain made were for Netflix, very different films. One was an essay film about consumption by now, and the other was a story about 4 children lost in the Amazon jungle, the lost children. And they, were not true crime, not celebrity docs, and The Lost Children was this, second globally most watched, and it's a Spanish-speaking film. So I think there is, as you were saying, there is the appetite for these stories. It's just finding the way to tell them.
And I think also it's important for us to find new ways and not to shy away from that change. I mean, obviously television changes. I've got a theory that television changes in 30-year cycles. Things change. When I first started, I was one of the first people to start using cameras, saying, "Oh, we don't need a cameraman. I can go out there with a camera." And why don't we film with ordinary people? Why do we have to always have experts? So we did that 30 years ago, and I remember getting a bit of pushback in the department I worked in the BBC. And I think we're in that 30-year cycle where the landscape has changed, and we can't ignore that. We have to embrace it, and we just have to be the people what we're good at, which is storytelling. And we're kind of a bit like investigative journalists, right? That we're always seeking the truth. We want to tell the authentic story. That's what matters to me, to tell the authentic story from the person's perspective, from the local, the extraordinary women that you saw in this film, how they've been empowered by what they do. So I think we just have to find new ways of telling that story and reaching to a broader audience.
I know there are lots of documentary makers in this audience who would like me to ask you about the nuts and bolts of how this came together. I mean, you had support from Nobel Prize outreach. How did that work? What does it take to get a film like this made? Do you want to answer that? Yeah.
I can start, and
yes.
you take on. I mean, I guess from Grain's perspective, Nobel gave us a brief to make issue-led, and I think we sort of tried to slightly flip that into something less boring, more cinematic, and to be driven by characters. And they gave us the freedom to do that. Again, we wanted to make this appealing to people that wouldn't just tune in to a Nobel film or think that they're just watching something about vaccination.
In fairness to the Nobel Foundation, they gave us a really open brief. I mean, once they'd got the idea, so there were 3 films. One was made in Chile, in the Atacama Desert, another one in America about insulin, and then our film. And what I think I really respect about Grain is that what they did was they looked for filmmakers in country. So, okay, I don't live in Pakistan, but because I've made lots of films in Pakistan, they approached me to make the film. So I think that's really important to say, that they work as much as possible with local filmmakers. So the brief from the Nobel Foundation was actually really open-ended. And then Grain, what's lovely about working with Grain is that they are a director's company. They give directors a free will to go and make the film. They put trust in you. That's the most important thing, is that there was so much trust put in me. I wrote this script without having done a recce. They trusted me that I would find those stories, and that's exactly what we did. Again, just to go back to the fact that I had a fantastic local producer, and we did have to produce a lot of it. I mean, okay, I'll just give you a quick example. All those people who are denying. Now, we didn't just bump into them. We worked with a local office who know their terrain. They know that region. So I said, listen, we can't just paint this picture that these women go out there, putting drops in children's mouths really easily. We need somewhere where we're going to find deniers. So they said, oh yeah, we know this area. Over there, that whole community is against it. So we said, okay, can we get the permission to go and film there? They said yes. Their outreach workers went there and said, look, there's a film crew coming. They want to come and film what your feelings are about it. That's exactly how it happened. The same thing with a religious denier. I knew that I had to get a religious denier. And so they knew who those people are, because they deal with them every day. Ishrat deals with these people every day. So, I have to produce the film as much as I'm directing it, to find the right stories to tell the story I want to tell.
And that was, for me, a really jaw-dropping and so enlightening, seeing that conversation with the religious denier and seeing him change his mind. And, I mean, there's a kind of a wider question here, which is, do you think documentaries in general change people's mind?
I would hope so, yes. I mean, I think, documentaries I've made in the past have brought about policy change. So I think that's our role, actually, is to open a window into a world that people don't know. And then hopefully that opens their minds to the stories that they're watching. So, I mean, I'm a firm believer that documentaries do make a huge difference. And I think sometimes, they cut through and they get to the hearts and minds of people, which is the best way to kind of open up a debate.
I couldn't put it better.
Wow. Well, join me, please, in thanking Ruhi and Marta for this extraordinary film.